Hello and welcome to Pain Unfiltered, where we go in-depth into the interventional pain and spine world with some of the top key opinion leaders and executives in the space. We are your hosts, Dr. Patrick Buchanan and Dr. Timothy Deere for this ASPN podcast. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 1, season 2 of Pain Unfiltered podcast. I'm Dr. Patrick Buchanan, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Timothy Deere. You know, Tim, when we first started this podcast, I really didn't have any expectations on how this would actually go. But I've really been amazed at the support we've received from this. Having people come up to me at NANS and other meetings talking about how much they really enjoyed the podcast really means the world to me. So I just want to thank everyone out there for the support. We appreciate it all. And you too, Tim, it's been really enjoyable going through this experience with you. So thank you so much.
You know, Patrick, I think when you came to me with this idea, I thought it had potential. But I think, again, a couple of things have happened. Number one, your preparedness. You're always prepared. And I think that's important. Number two, the quality of the guests have been wonderful. And then thirdly, I think our community, we want to learn from each other. We want to hear each other's stories. And we want to hear from doctors and industry partners and nurse practitioners and scientists. And so I think it's all that combination that's made it successful thus far. So I think this season 2 is going to build even further, and we're going to go to a more advanced video model as well. So I think we're making great progress, but we have a lot more to do, and we have a lot of great topics to discuss this year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Speaking of support, we're excited to announce our first sponsor of the season 2, Mainstay Medical. They were the first company to come out and support season 1. And their episode with Dr. Rob Heroes and his patient was a great listen to last season. They, their team is phenomenal from Jason Hannon on down. They just released their 5-year data at NANS. Tim, can you just share some of your thoughts on Mainstay Therapy and their Mainstay Medical?
Yeah, well, no, I think it's about innovation, right? I think that's why we have, this topic today, and that's why, Mainstay has been a great sponsor. They appreciate our appreciation of innovation, and I think second thing is data. So if you have good innovation with data and the 5-year data, that's so rare, to have innovation and data. That's what it's all about, right? So I want to really compliment them. I think Jason Hannon's coming to West Virginia in a week or two to visit me. And it's always an honor to have any of our industry partners, leadership come to here to share ideas. So I think it goes back to that type of great commitment. And hopefully we'll see all of our partners commit to that type of data collection. That's so important for the future for reimbursement.
Absolutely. Tim, I can't think of a better way to kick off season 2 than one of the biggest, if not the biggest, acquisition of the year last year in industry. Intracept and Boston Scientific. Today, we have 2 of the top leaders from each company to dig a little deeper dive into this. Dr. Ray Baker, Chief Medical Officer of Relievent Medsystems, now Boston Scientific Neuromodulation, and Jim Cassidy, President of Boston Scientific Neuromodulation. Thank you guys for both joining us today.
Thank you.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. We'll just have you just quickly introduce yourselves. Ray, you can go first, and then Jim, kind of what got you to this point, a little bit about your backgrounds.
All right. Well, I want to start by just thanking you, Patrick and Tim, for allowing us to be on this first episode of season 2, and the first one where you're bringing audio and video together. Is kind of historic. So thank you for allowing us to be on. It's a privilege. I come to this as an anesthesiologist, practiced interventional pain medicine for a long time, probably longer than I'll admit, but well up into 25 or 30 years. I loved it because it really did allow me to be involved in patient care and be able to change people's lives. And that's really what we're in the business of doing, right? If we do what we do well, we're changing people's lives. At the same time, I was frustrated because we didn't really have a great way to differentiate different pain sources. And with that, we really started having trouble with outcomes because we couldn't select the patients well and separate them out. And that led to really poor outcomes in general. So at the same time where we could provide life-changing relief, the ability to do it consistently and differentiate pain generators was always a frustration to me. So when I went on my career, really it was about working with companies and trying to change that. I also did a leadership track and went up through a couple of societies, NAS and what was SIS and is now IPSIS, and kind of had a focus there on health economics, and went up through that. At the time, I wasn't sure that would help me, but I look back on it now and it was a tremendous help. Looking back, I joined with Relievent in 2017 full time, although I'd been a consultant with them from the beginning. And now I'm really excited to be an employee of Boston Scientific and be able to bring these two companies together.
That's great, Ray. How about you, Jim?
Oh, great. Yeah, well, I'll echo the thanks. It's great being on the podcast, Patrick and Tim, and happy to kick off the year as well. So I was a mechanical engineer in manufacturing and pharma of all places, and then spent a little bit of time in strategic consulting, and then joined Boston about 20 years ago now, which is it's amazing. Like your career goes faster than you think when you're starting off. So it's gone by in a blink of an eye. And I remember when I first got into neuromod, probably 17 years ago, just falling in love with the technology, the people, and the impact on the patients. And it just struck me at the time. And it was actually tough because I left neuromod about 5 or 6 years ago to go over to cardiology, and I ran our Watchman division over there. And it was tough leaving the space because I just loved it so much. And I'm so excited to be back in the space, to be honest. And I think the unmet needs are just massive in the space, and the opportunity there. What we do for patients or what you guys do for patients is just really special. And the technology and how the pace of innovation in the space is just great. So I've been at it for 20 years now, and I think I've never been more excited about the opportunities ahead of us than today.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate having you both on. Let's start with you, Ray. Can you just briefly discuss, for those who aren't too familiar with the Intracept therapy, kind of how you got involved with this company specifically? And I know this is a lot, but kind of your original plan was your original plan to get acquired, to IPO? Kind of what was the business plan in all of this?
Sure. Well, I really am privileged because I was able to be with the company even before it was Relievent. It was originally with Johnson & Johnson, and I was a consultant with Johnson & Johnson working on intradiscal therapies. And they came to me one day and said, hey, we got this idea that there's this nerve that we want to try to ablate inside bone. Can you help us try to sort that out? Lo and behold, they spun that off into Relievent, its own company, in 2006. So I've been with Relievent as a consultant ever since the beginning, 2005, 2006. Really the premise of the therapy is this. For the longest time, we looked at the disc as the major source of low back pain. It was where we focused, and we tried to ablate it, to replace it, to fuse it, to inject biologics into it, to regenerate it. We tried everything. But the outcomes really weren't as good as we thought they should have been. So we knew there was a missing piece to this puzzle, but we really didn't know what it was. So come to find out, we focused everything on the disc, but we ignored the end plate. And if you look at any other joint in the body, we don't do that. We look at the joint as a whole. So when we looked at the end plate and you look at the science of that, what you have happening with what we now call vertebrogenic pain or vertebral end plate pain is that degeneration of the disc and the end plate simultaneously result in breakdown of that end plate. The breakdown in the end plate allows the inflammatory disc material to seep into that bone marrow. That creates what amounts to an autoimmune type reaction, a very strong inflammatory reaction. On MRI, that ultimately shows up as modic changes, but for a patient, that shows up as low back pain that hurts typically if they sit for a long period of time, if they bend forward, if they try to lift things. And we see that this is actually a pretty major source of low back pain. At least 1 in every 6 low back pain patients have this vertebrogenic pain. So now to the second part of your question, and that is kind of the acquisition versus IPO. I think a lot of companies tell their employees and they say, listen, we are going to be prepared to take this all the way, right? We're going to IPO. But all the while, they have a strategy to be acquired. And it's sort of this dual strategy, but they're really hoping to be acquired. What we did with Relievent is we really ran what was a single strategy in IPO. We thought that this had gone on far enough, and the amount of money we'd raised, et cetera, was going to preclude all but the very largest companies to acquire us. And we felt, frankly, that we were confident that we could take this IPO as soon as the markets open. So we were surprised when Boston came along. I mean, we were literally adding legal counsel, adding, all the things that we would need to IPO. The good part about that is we built the company right. We built it to last. We did not build it to sell. And I think that made us, I hope from Jim's point of view, a good acquisition candidate. So
Ray, let me ask you a follow-up question on that, and then we have a few questions for Jim. So I talked to Larry Koo, neurosurgeon from LA, good friend of mine. He's in Los Angeles and now Hawaii part-time, lucky man. Larry told me he worked on this project over 20 years ago. So the two follow-up questions are this: what took so long? And why did you survive when other companies failed over that period of time? Because that's a long journey to get here with Jim.
Yeah. So people, say now, they say, what did you do to become successful as a company? What was the magic? And they don't realize the time it took. So Tim, what you just brought up is really important. We had to climb, as I say, 3 hills. The first hill was to introduce a new diagnosis and to get people to believe in that diagnosis, because if they didn't believe in the diagnosis, they wouldn't believe in the therapy. So we had to introduce this concept that the end plates hurt, the basic vertebral nerve was the cause of that pain, and that MODIC was the biomarker that would select out patients with vertebrogenic pain. That was the first hill to climb. The second hill to climb was to develop a therapy and to prove that therapy works. And that would be the Intracept therapy, using bipolar RF energy to ablate that basic vertebral nerve. So we needed to not only do one RCT, we really needed to overdo everything. So we did 2 RCTs because we knew there were going to be a lot of skeptics. The third hill is when you're creating a new diagnosis, really, and you're creating a new therapy. It takes a lot of reimbursement lift. It's a really heavy reimbursement lift to come in there and get a Cat 1 code. That all just takes a lot of time. So when you say, what is the key to success? I think not taking shortcuts. I think that is number one. Staying with doing it the right way, building it to last. Very patient investors. I mean, we just had a board meeting a couple nights ago where the board got together as a celebration. And we talked about the fact that it took just a tremendous amount of fortitude on the side of the board, those venture capitalists, to continue to reinvest in this therapy, to believe in us even when it was somewhat difficult in the middle years. And I'm glad they did. Super fortunate to have such a nice board and such great investors.
Ray, I think you made some great points to any company that's looking to IPO or get acquired. I mean, in terms of patients, doing it right, focusing on studies, having patient investors, and worrying about patient outcomes. So I think that's great. Let's get to the other side of this with Jim. What are you looking for specifically when looking to acquire a company and therapy?
Yeah, no, great question, Patrick. I think there's a couple things that really come into play. There's this big notion of this concept of strategic fit. Like, does it fit with the company that we are today? And we kind of think of it in a few different ways. One is just on the commercial side. So are the physicians that we currently call on and that we work with, are they going to benefit from the therapy? So is there a fit commercially in that respect? There's other ways to think of commercial fit. You can think of some of the market development capabilities we have. Are they going to fit as well? But typically that's the biggest one on the commercial side is the team that we have calling on physicians. The physicians that they call on, will they benefit from it? The other piece of fit is just from an R&D standpoint, like, do we understand the technology and can we continue to innovate, after we acquire something? Do we feel confident in continuing to be able to innovate in the category? And the third one, which is tough to honestly, in the diligence process, tough to ferret out, but is really important, is a cultural fit. Like, do the entities fit together well culturally? So that's the fit piece, and so that's a big part of it, right? Like, is there a logic why this therapy should fit with this company? And then there's obviously the strength of the therapy itself, and there's a lot that goes into that, right? What's the level of unmet need that's out there? What's the rigor? Tim talked about the clinical data, and what's the rigor around the clinical data and the efficacy and how that's been proven out. Clearly, the reimbursement landscape is something that's super important, and do we feel confident in that reimbursement landscape and the overall economics of the therapy for payers and clinicians alike? And then lastly, just the competitive dynamics around the technology, and do we feel comfortable that we can be successful, like, as an owner of the therapy? So those are a few of the things, but I think it boils down to typically the strategic fit question with kind of the strength of the therapy.
So, Jim, I want to ask you a follow-up question about the strategic fit. Boston Scientific Neuro Division has been a neuromodulation company. So, the question is, are you now a neuromodulation company, or are you a pain company?
Yeah,
what's that mean for the future?
That is a great question, and it's a question we get from our employees a lot too. Is like, are we a neuromodulation company or a pain company? And clearly we are within neuromodulation. We're both a brain and movement disorder company and a pain company that primarily leverages neuromodulation as our kind of core technology. But I think we'll talk about this. Maybe we'll get to it later. But I think with the way Boston Scientific, we've thought about how we compete in various marketplaces is this concept of category leadership. And what does that mean? It means can we offer a portfolio of products that matter to the treating specialty physician? And I'd say for us as an organization, we probably pivoted over the past 5 to 10 years of being purely focused on spinal cord stimulation as the only therapy we offer, to more of a broader portfolio view of what does it take to be the best partner to interventional pain physicians.
Jim, I wanted to ask one more follow-up question for you. You mentioned billing and coding. I know there were a lot of headwinds with the Vertiflex acquisition in terms of, you launched during COVID. There were some billing issues and coding issues too. What lessons did you learn from that acquisition in terms of the timing of the Intracept integration?
Yeah, I know. Great question. I feel like, and frankly, all of these don't go exactly as you plan. All these acquisitions, you have a whole bunch. There's a lot of planning that goes in, and inevitably things take a different shape than you anticipated. And certainly Vertiflex and the lessons from Vertiflex were top of mind as we went into this acquisition process. And I'd say there's two big things. Certainly on the reimbursement piece is just more diligence and more of a deeper understanding of what it's going to take from a coverage standpoint. That was our primary focus for Intracept, is really understanding how the coverage landscape is going to change and improve, hopefully, right, over the next several years. And so we spent a lot of time understanding that, rolling in the data, speaking with outside consultants, just to get us confident that there's really good runway and we had a good position overall from a reimbursement and coverage standpoint. And then the other big one is just, I think, there's a lot that goes into developing, commercializing a novel interventional spine therapy, right? And I think we probably weren't as aware of that, 6-7 years ago as we are aware of it today. Like, all that it's required from an education standpoint, from a clinical data standpoint, from an innovation standpoint, from a reimbursement standpoint. So all these elements that I think we went in a much more educated, let's call it, as we into the Relievent process. And we learned a lot of that from the Vertiflex experience. And then your question on timing, I would say it was less, there were no internal Boston Scientific dynamics around timing. It was more some of the things that Ray was speaking to. I think, we had, frankly, been looking at Relievent for, 15 years and along their journey, right? Because it's always been a very interesting therapy and, treating low back pain through an ablative approach. And it was really watching their success, right? And seeing how much success they were having over the past 6 to 12 months that got us more confident to move forward with them.
That's great. So let's talk about the Intracept acquisition specifically. How did this talks come about? Who approached who first, and kind of how did that start to evolve?
Yeah, I think I can start, and Ray can add to this as well. I think that like I was mentioning, is that we've been looking at Relievent for quite some time, and monitoring their progress. And I'd say that you started to see the impact of the Intracept data, right? The second RCT, and how that kind of changed society guidelines and recommendations, kind of in the back half of, what was it, 22 now, right? And then how that started to create this momentum from a reimbursement and coverage standpoint. And so as a result of some of that activity, we reached out to Relievent, and started discussions around, could there be a good partnership, or arrangement agreement between the two companies. And then and Ray can add to that, but then that furthered into a diligence process that we got to know a lot, because you only know what you know from the outside before that point, and then you go into a diligence process and you really get to know a lot more about the company and the clinical data, and then the commercial progress and the reimbursement. And I think we were just frankly extraordinarily impressed with the team at Relievent. I think frankly, from the first discussion that we had through that diligence process, just individual after the leadership, the work that had been done to build the therapy to where it was, the momentum they had commercially, and also from a coverage standpoint. And then to Ray's point, it was clear they were looking at this they were looking at this as a multi-decade kind of opportunity in vertebrogenic pain. This was like, there was a vision behind what this could be. And that's exciting, when you're around a group of individuals that have that vision of where things could be, and the Relievent team certainly had that. And it frankly was inspiring for us in that process.
So from my point of view, we talked internally, and we thought, look, if we were going to get acquired, we would want it to be Boston, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But we thought, from a cultural fit, from a lot of reasons, that would be the best fit for us. At the same time, I have to be honest, we kind of straight-armed the initial approach, and the reason for that is when you undergo the negotiation and then the diligence, it can really distract the team. We were really hitting our stride, coming out of COVID, really starting to ramp commercially, and we were head down and just focused. And if you're not careful, it can really be disrupting to your executive team. When you take them offline, you give them the prospect that, hey, there's this deal in the works. And so we kept it quiet for as long as we could, first of all. And I think Tyler, Chris Guine, and others just did a great job of being able to get the early negotiations done, so that when we went into the final negotiations, we were able to do that extraordinarily quickly. But it was evident from the beginning that Boston was very serious, and they had done their background, they do their diligence, and they impressed us a great deal, and they persevered and said, no, we really are going to keep going after you guys. We're going to ultimately bring these two companies together, which they did.
Ray, I want to ask you two questions. I know we have about 10 minutes left here, and I don't want to make either one of these long questions, but I think they're both important for me to learn from, and hopefully our listeners. So Jim mentioned the ASPN, he mentioned the guidelines. We wrote some guidelines on BVN ablation because a lot of our members had no clue the appropriate use, the appropriate candidate, the appropriate selection. They had not read your study, many times, and they just really had heard about it. They'd seen it, but they had no clue. And so the question I have for you, number one, is we put a lot of pride in guidelines. It's one of the things I think we do well. How important are society guidelines for the future, and how important was that guideline for you? And then part two of the question, when you trained me, you brought this computer model to my clinic, and we use this great computer modeling I'd never seen before. And so I guess the question is, what role does that play in your education, and where are we going in the future with education? Are we going to get away from cadavers more into things like that? So those are the two questions I have for you.
Well, look, I think that we pride ourselves on being a disruptive company. And I think working with ASPN, working with you has been fun because you're innovative. A lot of what you do at ASPN is very disruptive, right? And so it's a nice fit for us. And I'll get to the SIM in a minute, but when we when we look at how important guidelines are, they're extremely important for a lot of reasons. It's important to payers. It's important for physicians because we come to the physicians and say, hey, we got this vertebrogenic pain, you diagnose it with Modic, but you really got to build that out for physicians. What does that look like? What does the patient look like? Also, how do I put that into my algorithm? What do I do in the office? What do my APPs do on Monday morning? So those guidelines really are where the rubber meets the road, and really important to get that out there, get it in the hands of physicians. And that to me is a great partnership between companies and societies to educate physicians. In terms of the sim, we're proud of that. We didn't start by saying, hey, we want to do a simulator, but there were reasons with the technology, the nitinol that we used to create a curve, that we needed to use a sim. But we have an extraordinarily gifted R&D team that are almost fanatical in their wanting to create the perfect product, meaning the perfect bone quality on that sim. Everything had to be right, and they 3D printed model after model after model till they got it right. But I am very pleased with the outcome, and I think that is sort of the future of where we're going a lot. I think that you're going to see a lot of other technologies adapt that kind of a simulator for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I have to say, Rave, I did your sim maybe a couple of weeks ago in training, and I was quite impressed. I think the biggest thing is you don't need fluoro. There's no fluoro exposure, which is great. So you can, get all these images as much as you want in all kind of different angles, and it does feel like you're kind of right in that bone. So great job with that. Well, turn to Jim with another question for you as we wrap up here. Jim, where do you kind of see, what's your vision of the future of the neuromod division at Boston Scientific? Are you looking to acquire more? Are you pretty complacent to where you're at now? Where do you kind of see this in the next several years?
Yeah, so I've been back in neuromod now for 7 months. And like I alluded to before, it's been really impressive just to see the innovation in the space, both from just the technology, the core technology and the innovation there, but then also all the new therapies that have come about, like many of which weren't around 6-7 years ago when I left the space, which has been, I think, invigorating. And, back to Tim's question, like, are we a neuromodulation company or a pain company? I do feel, when it comes to pain, like, we really think about it from this category leadership mindset. Like, do we have the right portfolio of products that matter to you? Right, that the intervening specialty physician, and we want to have that best portfolio of products. So as we think into the future, we think it really in two frames of reference. One, STEM is still core to what we do, and want to continue to innovate in STEM. That I think we're still scratching the surface, frankly, around what we can do with STEM. There's a whole new era of connectivity and data, and how we use that data just to improve therapies for patients and the follow-up side. I'm really excited about where we can go in STEM. But we also have a whole other segment on the interventional spine side that, clearly as a company with Cosman, with Vertiflex, and with Relievent, we've been really focused on this broader portfolio. And we'll continue to think through other things that fit within that portfolio. And I think even more important there is it's not just the portfolio, it's how these therapies work together, right? How do the therapies work together, and how do we as a company make the therapies work together better, whether it be from an educational standpoint, whether it be from a clinical knowledge standpoint, because there's just, again, so much opportunity, and particularly in chronic pain, and we want to be, the interventional pain company, right? In terms of helping to address the significant unmet need and the societal burden of chronic pain. We think there's a unique opportunity we have as a company to do that.
Jim, I want to finish with a follow-up question, and then we'll give Patrick the last thought of the session. So I want to get just a little bit more specific about what you just said, because I'm really enjoying your message and what your thought process is. So the question, again, two-part question for you. Number one of your competitors just bought an SI joint company.
Yep.
And there's estimates that market's going to grow tenfold in the next 5 years. So, and I think we finally are learning how to treat that problem. So I think one question is that something you're going to look at? And then question two is, we get a lot of radiation. Patrick mentioned the training. And, I was recently talking to a couple of startup companies that are looking at navigation for the pain space. And, we've had it in other fields like cardiology, but, what do you see? Is there be a movement between the big neuromodulation companies like yourself and your competitors to bring in some navigation eventually so we get less radiation?
Great. Well, great questions on both fronts. I mean, I think on the first one, I mean, it's such an active space right now, right? And SI fusion or SI joint, treatments is one of those categories we look at. We literally every month we look at a number of categories and a number of companies within those categories, and that is one of the categories that we look at. But as you know, there's multiple other categories out there as well, right? Whether it's peripheral nerve stimulation, that's another big category that's out there. There's a whole bunch of work that's going on in different disc therapies, degenerative disc, and so I think that is certainly an area of interest to us overall as we think about this portfolio strategy. But we're also focused right now on just digesting what we have, right? There's still opportunity on the Vertiflex side. And then there's also, as we talked about with Relievent, there's a lot of work to be done there just in terms of continuing to grow and commercialize that therapy. And then on the radiation, Tim, that's a great point on radiation. And there is a lot of linkage to what we've done on the interventional cardiology side. And I think that's an area to further explore. I can't say that I know exactly where we are in terms of our innovation in that category, but we certainly had really good partnerships in interventional cardiology address that exact issue right around. And obviously, in EP as well, that's a massive area in that space as well. So that's probably an area ripe for innovation overall.
Very good. Thank you.
Last question for both of you. Ray, we'll start with you first. Same question. Where do you see the interventional pain space in the next 5 years, and what do we need to do as a field to ensure access to patient care?
Look, I'm incredibly excited about where this field is going. And, I don't think we've landed on a precise term, but the advanced interventionalist is where I'm going to stake my money, right? That to me is where the puck is going. One of the things that got me excited about Boston, they're one of the few companies who realized that. Like, they saw the future and they said, we're going to go out right now and help be a part of that, help to create that future. So I think where the field is headed is we're going to have better therapies, more differentiated therapies that allow us to be precise, to precisely identify those pain generators and go after those pain generators. So we're going to have better outcomes. And so I think I'm just, super excited about that. I think it's at the same time, to balance that enthusiasm, we have to maintain access to care. So that just means us working together. I have this phrase I use over and over. Interventional pain is one of the few areas where we circle the wagons and shoot inward. We've got to stop doing that. We have to work together. Societies have to work together. Physicians and societies, companies and societies have to work together to demonstrate what we're doing to really change patients' lives. And that's the message that has to get out there.
We'll go to you, Jim. Quickly, your thoughts on this?
I'm not sure I could add much more than what Ray said. I agree, right? I think it's been interesting just to see how much more targeted therapies have come in the space, like whether it's STEM as well, right? We've gotten more indication oriented on the STEM side. There's been more technologies that allowed us to be more specific around patient disease state. Same thing we're seeing in some of the interventional spine area. And I think that's really cool to be able to go to the root, the source of the problem and tackle it. And I think that's great for patients, and particularly on the interventional spine side, less invasive approaches as well, which is also great for patients. So I think that continues, right? I think the only other thing I'd add is on the STEM side, I do think this data and connectivity piece could be really important as we figure out how to use that more effectively to know how to best support patients in their journey. So I think more targeted, less invasive on STEM, using more data and connectivity. And I couldn't agree more with Ray in terms of just continuing to do the companies like Relievent, Vertiflex, and there's others out there that have done this. It's just the data is so important in this category, like every category, but in particular in this category. And so how do we keep driving it? And then highlighting our successes. I agree. That's the one thing is like probably my biggest coming back into the space from the cardiology side. What these therapies do for patients, man, just so powerful, so powerful. And we could do more, right? And across showcasing how these therapies change lives. So I think that's probably the add-on I'd have to Ray's comments there.
Thank you guys both for that. So we'll just get into our final thoughts. I'll start first. Thank you both for coming on, Ray and Jim. I think this was a fantastic kickoff to season 2 here. I think this is an amazing acquisition. I think this serves as a blueprint for other companies looking to either IPO or to get acquired, as putting your head down, like you said, working, investing on research, patient care, education first, and let the other things play out afterwards. So congratulations to you guys. Love to hear your thoughts too, Tim, on this as well.
Well, so just to wrap up, Patrick, first of all, Ray and Jim, thanks for coming on. It's been a great conversation. Two is, I think, Ray, I started calling myself interventional spine and nerve specialist about 8 or 9 years ago. I quit using the word pain because I think we're really treating function and the quality of life. And I think Jim really highlighted that. So I do think that we're a whole new group of people. And I think people like Patrick coming out, a young physician really growing is what we're all about, and advancing together with therapies. I do think the collaboration piece you mentioned is very important. And, we all do well if all the companies do well and all the doctors do well. We don't do well to see other people fail. And I think that's what we've had the wrong attitude as a specialty in the past. So I hope we can get past that. It's really critical. And lastly, I just want to say, at the end of the day, I think this acquisition was so good for our field because, it shows that, companies can come together and advance both companies. And that's what I see you doing. And I think that's a model that we hope to see repeated over and over again, because I think innovation will often occur in the startup company, a new company, but the larger companies will lead the way once the innovation develops to make it where it needs to go, because they can fund a larger study and do the additional work down the road with the payers, because access is going to get more and more difficult, as we all know. So data will become gold. Data will become the currency. So with that, thank you both so much for coming on. I think it's been a great discussion. I look forward to seeing you soon. And Patrick, thank you very much. Great job, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys again. So this wraps up episode 1, season 2 of the Pain Unfiltered podcast. Thank you all for joining us.